How are you doing today, everyone? Welcome into the SFS channel. Today, we're going to be talking through some fantasy football lineup advice. Of course, our start and sit wide receivers and running backs. This video in particular is the running back segment. So after you're done watching this one, make sure to go check out the wide receivers portion, which is live on our channel right now, which of course, if you haven't subscribed to it, make sure you go down there, do so, turn the bell on as well so you're never late for a new piece of content and all that great stuff. We're posting multiple fantasy football advice style pieces multiple times a day per week here this season. So you don't want to miss out on any of that stuff. Sit back, relax, enjoy today's video, and let's get into the starts for this week. All right, I'm going to do a little bit of yapping here before we get into our first player, Miles Sanders, because I think that this is relevant information to you guys for your lineups for this week. This is the first time this season where, this is week 9, of course, that I have really felt the absence of running backs playing a humongous factor in lineups for this week. This is the first week where things really feel few and far between. You know, I was kind of talking back and forth with some Discord members today about the top 20 aren't even all players you want to have in lineups this game. You know, the 5 must-start running backs for this week are kind of desperation plays here. Like our threshold, and I'm not going to do this for the sake of correctness this week, but in general, like my expectation for, the last 2 must-start players this week, where I usually have it be a threshold of 10 points in half PPR scoring for, the number we're looking for out of these lower-end RB2s that you're looking to start in that second running back slot. You might be happy to get 8 or 8.5 half PPR points out of these players just because the caliber of player is so much lower and the situation is just not that presents an opportunity for 20 or so touches. Like you're going to be looking at limited touch basis and looking for players that are averaging really good efficiency, which isn't always the easiest thing to predict, or obviously just doesn't always happen the way you want it to based off of player nature and use and whatnot. So that's being said, we've got 5 players today that are in the RB2 level range that I think need to be in lineups, considering the fact that, like I said, I think that there's a hard line this week. Let's put it at the RB16 number. So unless you're playing in an 8-man format where 16 running backs is all that's in starting lineups for this week, if you put a receiver at the flex position, you're looking pretty scarce for this week's game. So with that being said, I figured I'd toss all that out there and then get into our results from last week. So basically what we do every week is we record our correctness for the start-sit segment from the week prior, and then we share that with you at the top of this video to basically just be transparent or whatever. I don't know. I thought you guys would appreciate it, and it seems like you guys have to this extent throughout this point in the year. So very, very good week for us in both the start and sits category. We went 4 out of 5 in both the start and sits, so 8 out of 10 overall, 80% accuracy for us this past week. Our one miss in the sit category was Melvin Gordon, who actually was out-touched by 5 rushes to Latavius Murray. They both just happened to score a goal line touchdown. And then our one miss in the starts category was Raheem Mostert, who I honestly expected to do much better in his matchup than he did, but had somewhat of a fairly quiet, average, modest game. So whatever, it's fine. Again, 80% accuracy. Very happy with that coming into this week. So Miles Sanders, first up here, doesn't seem like the hottest take in the world, but like I said, these are desperate times and desperate measures. You better be starting Miles Sanders this week, or at least thanking your lucky stars if you've got him sitting on your bench because you have better options. This is again, I'll say it, this is the last time I'll say this, but it is the toughest matchup. Maybe I'll say it again a couple more times, but this is the toughest matchup or situation for RB depth to this point in the year. He has the Houston Texans this week, which basically mirrors a similar matchup to what he had last week with game script being in mind here. 14-point favorites the Eagles are against the Houston Texans. Last week against the Pittsburgh Steelers, another woeful underdog here. Miles averaged 8.67 yards per carry on under 10 rushing attempts, scored a touchdown. Again, extremely efficient. He's projected 76.5 rushing yards this week. That's a good number for him because obviously he added a couple of targets and receptions in there, and boom, you got your 10 points. I think you could even hit the over if they're running out the ball late. And actually what happened in this past matchup is that they pulled him in favor of Boston Scott to keep his legs fresh and healthy. So hopefully things don't get out of hand quite as fast as they did in week 8 here, but again, that opportunity is there for him to be very, very effective in this game. Deontay Foreman earned himself another week of lineup level play here. Chuba Hubbard could come back, and he is technically the official starter here, but the name of the game here is goal line touchdowns. That one rush can get you 6 points and spring you over the edge here in terms of making you a top 20 level player for a week. And D'Onta Foreman found the end zone 3 times in this past week's matchup against the Atlanta Falcons. So Cincinnati on paper is a rather tough defensive front. They are top 10 against fantasy running backs. However, last week, and I know it's apples to oranges here comparing the Browns running game to the Panthers, but they were able to find running lanes and to basically wash and move these Bengals defensive players out of their way. And while I don't think Carolina will have the same successfulness doing that, Foreman is a physical runner. He is a tough player, and this team knows its limitations at the quarterback position. I like P.J. Walker. He's a fun guy. He's a fun player that's rejuvenating DJ Moore's fantasy season here, but they understand once they get in between the 20s, it is time to run the ball with D'Onta Foreman and get him goal line reps and get him into the end zone. So a lot of stuff at play here that I like for Foreman. I think he may have even, we'll see if he earned the true starting role for this team. At the end of the day, I do think it'll probably be a 55-45 or even a 60-40 split, but still, those valuable touches I do expect to bounce his direction. So this is where things get crazy here. So I'm actually going to be putting a backup running back on my must-start segment for this week, which again attributes to that fine cutoff line here. I believe Jamaal is my running back 17 for this week. But basically, against Green Bay here, you've got a situation where DeAndre Swift reportedly is still not healthy, which is obviously head-scratching and frustrating. I think it goes without saying that due to the desperation of the position group for the week, you're probably starting DeAndre Swift as well. But Dan Campbell literally came out in a press conference. PFF posted this the other day. I was not aware of this until Monday, that they probably gave DeAndre Swift one too many carries, and that he probably shouldn't have played as much as he should have, and that Jamaal should have had more work. So basically, if that means anything to me, is that we might see another heavy dosage of Jamaal Williams in this matchup. DeAndre Swift averaged 1.2 yards per carry, going 5 rushes, 6 yards in the Week 8 matchup. So this is just annoying on a holistic basis. Just looking at the whole landscape here, everything about this kind of pisses me off as a guy who is trying to root for DeAndre Swift this season. But at the end of the day, this bodes very well for Jamaal Williams owners. And if you've got him sitting there on the bench, there's a legitimate case to put him in your RB2 spot. He can catch passes. He is vulturing goal line touchdowns like no tomorrow. And that's been something that's just been a present function of this offense for as long as I can remember. And it's been very prevalent this year as well, especially with Detroit taking some steps forward on the offensive side of the ball. So, again, there's lots of upside here. If they limit Swift's touches, this is potentially a gold mine for an easy stream option this week. Raheem Mostert, diving back into the wild now. The one thing that, after looking at this, made me slot him down one spot is the fact that they went out and traded for Jeff Wilson Jr. to basically, so Mike McDaniel's just rebuilding his RB room from San Francisco. He wants guys that know the structure of the scheme and the system that can run the plays they want to. I think that's ultimately why they traded Chase Edmonds away, who I still think is a better running back than Raheem Mostert in terms of pass catching ability and some of the things he does on a dynamic level, but he might not have just been a good fit for the West Coast offense, and that's fine. He's going to be in Denver now. We'll see what he's able to make of in that situation, which is just now totally crowded. Boone's still on IR, and you've got Latavius and Melvin and Chase Edmonds. But at the end of the day, I don't know if week 1 is going to be the answer for Jeff Wilson to come in here. I would still anticipate Raheem to be the starter, and typically the trend for these West Coast systems, especially Shanahan and what you're now seeing with Mike McDaniel, is that they pick one guy, they rock with him, they roll with him until they go down and get injured, and then they'll next man up mentality. Obviously, you'll see a few carries sprinkled in there for Jeff Wilson, I'm assuming, this week as well. But I still think this is Raheem Mostert's job to lose. This week, they're 5-point favorites against the Chicago Bears, which isn't anything crazy. I think they'll continue to run the ball with effectiveness. Raheem Mostert didn't have the greatest week last week, but for me, if we're talking about a top 24 play here, this is still someone that deserves to be in starting lineups here. And as I said, not expecting the best game from him in the world, but he's insanely efficient at times, very explosive, and has been getting the nod on the goal line as of late for this team. Also catching some passes in space infrequently. So there's some stuff to like here. Again, don't totally love Raheem Mostert here, but unless you want me to put my 11th ranked running back for this week, Jonathan Taylor, on the must starts for the week, take it for what it's worth here. Again, this is a miserable week for starting fantasy running backs. And then finally, Tyler Allgeier, who arguably I feel a little bit better about than Raheem due to the matchup. This Chargers defense has been very middle of the pack. They've been very mediocre, very average. And I said this in the receiver segment for start sit this week. I think that there's a chance that if Keenan Allen and Josh Palmer are out, the Falcons could win this game. Maybe they'll win the game outright with those two guys out there if they're both able to go. I think that their running threat is so dangerous that they could control the time of possession here and just really limit the possession and overall opportunity that Justin Herbert has with the ball in his hands. So for me, that makes this a very attractive matchup, a very intriguing opportunity. Tyler Allgeier is coming off his best fantasy game of his career. Now, I went and looked at the numbers. He was still insanely inefficient. He has yet to average 4 yards per carry in a game this year. However, he finally went out there and caught some passes, caught 100% of his 3 targets for 46 yards and a touchdown this week, and had 15 or more touches in the last 3 games straight. So he's getting work. Caleb Huntley is as well. If you have to stream him, I don't totally hate that either. I understand he's getting touches out there as well, and at times getting some red zone looks, not necessarily all the goal line work, but he's getting a percentage of that opportunity. And this is just a solid player. He is a C running back, we'll call him, that has a good matchup and a very run-heavy offense. And despite the fact that they went to overtime last week, they still only passed the ball 28 times, and that's with having 2 overtime possessions. So a lot of stuff at play here. Tyler Allgeier, though, someone that I think that you can get behind starting in these 12-man formats where you're just dying for running back play this week. All right, so now I'm going to transition into some sit running backs for this week's matchup. So Michael Carter, despite having a 56% snap share last week, is someone I'll be staying away from. Obviously, this is the Breece Hall injury fallout. Now they've got James Robinson in town. We saw some Ty Johnson last week. J-Rob only had a 22% snap share in Week 8. However, I'm staying away from Carter in this matchup because of the expected game script I think plays out here. Currently, the Jets are 12.5-point underdogs, expecting the Bills to just blow them out of the water here, of course. And despite the fact that he has a solid, skilled pass-catching repertoire here, the numbers of receiving opportunity with Zach Wilson to Michael Carter throughout his career have been shockingly low here. For some reason, he was willing to give Breece Hall those opportunities, but it hasn't always been the case with Michael Carter here. And I do think that my other worry in this situation, that despite the fact the game script could get out of hand here and maybe he gets more pass catching work, is the fact that J-Rob's 22% should go up here in his second game with the team. So I think this becomes kind of a full-fledged committee-style offense. We did hear from Mike LaFleur, Matt LaFleur's brother, the offensive coordinator for New York here, that they're going to go with kind of the hot hand approach here at the running back position, but I do think that each of these guys kind of have a situational skill set. I would like to see J-Rob just kind of tapped into and unlocked for this team, but at the end of the day, I don't know how realistic that is in this matchup, so staying away from basically all Jets running backs in this week's games. B-Rob, Brian Robinson, he proved me right last week. He showed us his limitations as a fantasy asset, and yet again, I hate to bash him about this, and I hate to kind of be negative around a guy who has a really cool story, and you know, obviously I'm rooting for as a player, and I really liked his tape coming out of college, but he just hasn't found efficiency on the ground. Now, part of this is not his fault. His offensive line is complete trash, but he has not averaged 4 yards per carry in any given suit up this season. So, like, he literally could have went out there and had 1 rush for 4 yards and averaged 4 yards a carry. He hasn't done that yet. So, basically, B-Rob is an inefficient player taking on a Vikings team this week that is the favorite. You'd expect that this game could get a lot of hand. The line's only 3.5 points for the Commanders, but I do think it might be a little bit worse than that. And at the end of the day, I've said this the last couple of weeks here, you're looking for boom or bust touchdown production. I don't think this is a matchup or situation where I feel comfortable with that being the case. And another kind of glaring thing here is he was 3rd in Washington running back snap count percentage last week. That means that J.D. McKissic and Antonio Gibson were getting more work than Brian Robinson was at the end of the day here. So the reason for that was game script. Washington was a team that trailed for the majority of the game and then had 2 desperation drives and somehow pulled that one out of their butts. But the 36% snap count percentage was shared amongst McKissic and Gibson, meaning they each had 36% respectively, and B-Rob was down there at 25%. So it's not a great look for him. Obviously, there is some overlap there, but of course, JD will play in 2-back sets or line up in the slot at times and, you know, have unique usages and formations and whatnot. But for Brian, I don't like to have him on the sit list here so frequently, but if he doesn't score a touchdown, it's very, very easy to predict that he is not going over 10 fantasy points. Darrell Henderson. Last week, Darrell Henderson was victim of the mother of all fantasy running back by committee offenses. That was ugly. If you watch the Rams game, you know what I'm talking about. This is one of the most hideous backfields in football right now. Not because the players suck, behind the line of scrimmage, but because the players blocking and trying to make line or lanes at the line of scrimmage also suck. This offensive line is totally battered, beaten up, bruised. I feel bad for him. I mean, Matt Stafford's back there getting killed. The running backs have no alleys to run through. And Darrell Henderson, for some reason, is getting outsnapped by Ronnie Rivers, or not outsnapped, but outtouched by Ronnie Rivers, and having Malcolm Brown come back and rise up from the ashes to get touches in this backfield on the goal line as well. And this is all with Cam Akers being inactive and Kyren Williams potentially being introduced into the offense this week. So on paper, Tampa Bay has not stopped anyone on the ground this year. This looks like a very good matchup, something that you should be excited about here. However, this committee, the fact that the offense is sputtering, this is going to be, the mother of all, bleep shows here between the Buccaneers offense and the Rams offense this week. That might be what do you call it? A riveting 13-10 type ball game here, maybe 17-14 field goal at the buzzer from Ryan Suckup here. I do believe Tampa Bay is the better team, but this is going to be an ugly, brutal matchup from start to finish. I think it's going to be extremely low scoring by these two teams as previous standards. If you watch the the NFC Championship, or it was the divisional round game between Tampa and the Rams, that's not the football game we're expecting here in this matchup. I'm expecting a lot more poor football, sloppy football, and very underwhelming points to come from everyone except for basically Cooper Kupp if his ankle is able to go in this matchup. CEH here, another running back that I am holy cow, I'm losing faith very fast in CEH. Now, I've been a pessimist all season on Clyde Edwards-Helaire. However, lately the snap count percentages have made me even more so. Now, this is a player that's coming off of a Week 8 bye week here, but in Week 7 against San Francisco had a season-low 27% snap count percentage, and Jerick McKinnon led the team in a 44% snap count percentage. 30% went to Isaiah Pacheco. So in that game, the most recent one played, he was the third running back in overall snap count percentage, yet we still look at him as the most valuable fantasy running back in that backfield. Beats me. Obviously, none of these guys are super effective right now, but even in this matchup against Tennessee, you're seeing a trend, and that's low snap count percentages every week for CEH. He's had one game over 50% all year. If he doesn't score a touchdown or make a very explosive play, it's a bust-worthy performance. He does not crack the 10-point threshold. And if you've got McKinnon and Pacheco, who Pacheco is technically the team starter going forward, or that was, what Reed announced a couple of weeks back. We'll see how they come out of the bye week, though. This just looks really ugly, and all these players right now are kind of unstartable, even this week with the brutality we have at the running back position, but not trusting him, even off a bye. I think that the most likely scenario every single week is a strong committee presence, and everyone is going to get some touches some way or another, and it's just going to be very hard to predict in what way, shape, or form that dynamic plays out here. And then lastly, Kenyan Drake. Now, Kenyan Drake is a player that I feel has the opportunity to have a nice game here. However, I'm not so sold that Gus Bus Edwards will be ruled out of this matchup. So the reason that that's relevant and important here is that if Kenyan Drake and Gus are both out there sharing touches, that's going to extremely limit each other's overall opportunity for volume. And this is a Saints defense that's very productive still. They're very solid. They're coming off of their best game of the season, shutting out the Raiders 24-0. So I think that, it would honestly be better for a stock, and maybe I could make an amendment here to the must-sit list this week if Gus Edwards were to be ruled out, because then I think Drake would have a more clear shot to seeing the vast majority of the work. But Edwards is dealing with a hamstring issue right now, of course. He's just a couple games removed from returning from his knee injury, the ACL he suffered in the summer of 2021. So there's a lot of stuff to break down and digest with health concerns alone for these two teams. Additionally, you've got a fairly predictable offensive game script for this team. I mean, there's no Rashad Bateman in this game. Mark Andrews is banged up, so how effective is this Baltimore passing offense going to be? And then you've got this, battered running back stable here that also has its question marks in terms of how effective this group can be. So to recap, the sits were Michael Carter, Brian Robinson, Darrell Henderson Jr., Clyde Edwards-Helaire, and Kenyan Drake. I realize now that I did not recap the starters after that portion was done. Go back and do that right now. Again, to recap, Miles Sanders, Deontay Foreman, Jamaal Williams, Raheem Mostert, and Tyler Allgeier are my starts for this week. Again, last time for real. Now, super brutal matchups this week and brutal availability of critical, lineup worthy pieces at this position group for week 9, the halfway marker of the season. This is why you hoard running back depth, why you don't trade your whole roster to make these league winning moves in week 4. The season is insanely long. We don't play fantasy football scared, but we also don't play, clueless football with obviously just our eyes on the prize the whole time, because there is a strategy and element of cautiousness that this position group needs to be tended to very delicately, because even in best ball leagues, like, I can't tell you how many of my best ball teams are completely loaded at all the other positions, but like I literally don't have running backs left. So just because I didn't draft more than 4 or 5 in some instances, and that just doesn't get the job done. So, ranting about running backs and their availability, but again, it just shows how important these guys are and why there's such a heavy emphasis on them during draft season. But there you guys have it. If you enjoyed today's episode, make sure to like, subscribe, and turn on the bell for our channel here. I appreciate all you guys, as always. If you have questions about your lineups, put those in the comment section below. I'm happy to help you out and give you anything you need for this week, as I can get around to you guys. Basically, whenever I got time, I'm hopping in the comments in the community Discord server. The invite link to that is in the description of today's episode. So go check all that stuff out. Again, I'll get back to you guys from now up until game time. Usually, every time I've got a half hour or so, I'll sit down, answer some questions on one of these episodes, and hopefully now having just 2 videos for start sit. We'll see how it does this week and see if we need to go back to the other format next week, but I think it'll be a little bit more organized and help me get back to a lot more of you than I've been able to, just because having 4 videos is a little bit overwhelming to try and answer from one day alone. So thank you guys so much for everything you've done for the channel here. I appreciate the heck out of all you, and I'll see you in the next video. Peace out.